What's going on, guys? Luminostic here, and I hope everybody got to watch my Ayahuasca Admixture plant video. We have more related videos coming out. One where I'm going to talk a little bit more about admixture. Well, I'm basically going to demonstrate how I make ayahuasca with different admixture plants. And this is something that I think there's a lot of misinformation that goes around because centers have an interest in getting people to sign up for dietas. In fact, while I'm thinking about it, I've seen something recently, in several places, that is really, really alarming. And some of these centers, I'm not going to name names, but let's just say that just being, indigenous owned and appearing to be, authentic is not necessarily any assurance that it's safe. Because there are these Toei dietas that are apparently going on for a year. No one should ever take Toei every day for a year. That's not, or Floripondia, you might know it as. There are, dietas with Floripondia or Toei. But yeah, I don't see any reason why that would ever be applicable to anyone unless you are like a really, really advanced shaman at the peak of your career in the prime of health. There's just a lot of really, I think, unscrupulous things happening. I was really surprised to see year-long dietas and with the tremendous price tags. I mean, and the reality is that there's no like rich guy from San Francisco that has $100,000 to spend on a year-long Toei retreat. He's not that guy by and large. So, but what I was originally saying is that I think a lot of the sentiment that it's not good to use admixture plants just comes from the fact that centers have an interest in getting people to sign up for lengthy dieta programs, when in reality you can get very similar, if not better, efficacy from taking ayahuasca that has the plants mixed in. The caveat with that is that you would have to prepare for the ayahuasca as if you were doing, say, a Bobensana dieta, right? But for, in my experience, a much briefer period of time. And it's not hard to understand why this is. The ayahuasca allows for there to be a better dialogue with the ally plants. So you could think of it as building a bridge between the individual that's consuming the medicine and the plant spirit. And then, of course, there are other ways to think about it. I don't necessarily think about it in terms of plant spirits. I don't not think about it in terms of plant spirits, but my perception of what all of this is somewhere in the middle. And so I like to think about it from both points of view. And another way to consider this is that when you combine the plants, there are all sorts of enzymatic reactions and chemicals combining, and the ratios are really important. And then when you consume the plants, and this is one of the reasons that the dietas, when preparing for something like Bobensana that has a very subtle presence, I guess would be a good way to put it. When you eat stuff, it changes the metabolites and the enzymes and the composition of a lot of the, even the acids in your stomach. And so taking that in mind, when you consume a plant, depending on what you have been eating and consuming for, months, even years, possibly, because of the way things are released by the body over time. In fact, people that eat a lot of processed foods, sometimes it'll be a month before they can have a clear vision. With ayahuasca, a 1-week dieta is not enough, and it's because of what I'm describing. But so you're creating fertile soil by engineering the enzyme landscape, and and everything changes. The flora and fauna in your microbiome are reconstituted based on different diets and whatnot. So I personally find the combination of ayahuasca with these medicines to be the most effective way to do it, and that's why I made the video. I feel like a lot of people that deserve access to these medicines can't afford to go to South America for a 6-week dieta, or even 2 weeks, or even 1 week, or a day. They have to do this from home. And so I am doing my best to offer what information I can that will assist those people in healing whatever it is they need to heal, in the interest of creating objective and a holistic perception in as many people as possible, as rapidly as possible. Because the more I watch this 3-ring circus sideshow go on, it's increasingly difficult for me, I guess, to maintain my faith that I had maybe 20 years ago, that humanity was becoming more enlightened and stepping out from the shadow of history and into a more meaningful future and a more fair future and a freer future. It really has become a mixed bag. There is still evolution. It's not like some things aren't improving. It's not that we aren't moving forward in some ways. But there are just so many influences that are exerting themselves on the culture and society and our minds and being and consciousness through, internet and politics and social pressures and all of this stuff that it's difficult to tell, I guess, even which way is forward for a lot of people. And there's a lot of unintended consequences of psychedelics, of an increased interest in spirituality, a combination of an imbalanced spiritual existence and psychedelics is not good. It really isn't. I've watched firsthand a lot of people use that combination of, ideas, spiritual ideas and beliefs and psychedelics basically to extract themselves from reality rather than using these things for what they're actually for, which is to aid us in perceiving things objectively and coming to terms with ourselves and finding our true place in the cosmos where we actually belong. So yeah, let me check in with the chat. I don't see anything yet, but by the way, you guys, I'm here to answer questions, and feel free to pop into the chat and interact in whatever way, shape, or form you see fit. I basically just popped on tonight to talk a little bit about the admixture plants, and I'm hesitant to even mention the Russell Brand thing again, because I don't want to be hung up on it, and I'm not really trying to alienate people. I know there's a lot of people in my community that really look up to him, and I've said it already, so I guess I'll say it again. I find that really sad. Every single characteristic of narcissist he exhibits in spades. This situation is not without evidence. People are saying, it's just accusations. And I think one of the reasons it sticks in my chaw so much is that I grew up with a narcissist parent. I know these people. Like, there's, the second I laid eyes on that guy, I knew. There's no, if you lived with it, there's no question about it. And I guess, the reason I felt compelled to make these posts and mention it again is that there's probably nothing in the world that I hate more than watching a charismatic narcissist get away with murder and people just fall all over themselves ignoring it. It's really just a sad state of affairs. And it is what our political system is based upon. Our whole celebrity adoration and idolization culture is entirely based on exactly that. Our culture is based around deception, basically. When I do research looking for ways to promote my channel and to, look for improvements and things I can do differently, what really strikes me is a complete and total acceptance of an absolute lack of ethics in marketing. Like, you are expected to just do everything you can to trigger people's psychological apparati and engage them to do what you want and to spend their money the way that you want them to. And, it's definitely still sort of frowned upon, I guess, to just outright rip people off. But when I watch these videos, I don't see much about, trying to actually make the content have substance and meaning and actually offer something to people and enrich their lives and give them useful information. It's all about how often to move the camera, what to put text on the screen, how many cuts per second to make to engage their attention. It's just, this is our entire society. We are taught politesse, to be polite and to put on the same facade that every narcissist in the world does in order to navigate society in the way that serves them. And, I understand that there's some necessity for that, but it seems to me that all of this needs to become unacceptable in order for us to move forward. And, it's a difficult thing to address, I guess, because people just kind of smirk at you like, listen to this naive fool. But I think the reality is, if you use plant medicines correctly, if you really, take the time to learn to understand your own psychology, to know thyself, if you make this a serious priority in your life, and an objective that you are committed to without faltering, eventually you can become a person that can navigate society without a facade and still succeed at it. Obviously it's more difficult at the current juncture, but I think what we need is people that are willing to start taking those chances and being unapologetically real at all times. That is, one of the primary solutions, I think, to re-engineering our society, a different idea, a different perception about what is actually acceptable in terms of authenticity and sincerity. Because as it stands at the moment, I'm not impressed, and I don't think it's working. It does not seem to be going super, super well out there in general. So, yeah. I mean, it's rough, man, because from my point of view, my entire life, I've just been, watching these. I used to call them Eddie Haskells, which is a reference that's probably lost on a lot of younger people. But there was this show in the 1950s called Leave It to Beaver. And there was a character that was an absolute douche when there were no adults around. And whenever there were adults around, he would act like he was this angelic, he would kiss everyone's asses and put on this big show, and everyone ate it up. And I've always hated that so much, because I am one of those rare people, I guess, that can see it. I can see it, and it's the norm. Generally, when people really like someone, it's a narcissist, almost without fail, I guess I'm still hung up on this Russell Brand thing, because that's, it's just one of the most glaring examples of that. And I guess it does really bother me that people can be Donald Trump, and they can be Russell Brand, and they can be, the funny thing is that in the case of the other side of the aisle, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, there is no perception that they're actually, kind or decent or intelligent or anything. There's not even a delusion on the part of the people that are pretending like it's somehow acceptable and necessary to allow people like that to take the helm in our world and lead us. And I mean, I've even seen it go so far as to one of my Democrat friends, I was talking to him about how much of an absolute wretch Kamala Harris was. And he's like, yeah, I know about her record, but I still put my daughter, his little 3-year-old daughter, in front of the TV and, tell her that show her when she's on TV and tell her she's something to aspire to and all this stuff. That just wrecked my mind. It just absolutely, seeing that kind of stuff just absolutely wrecked my mind. What is going on out there? Can someone help me? I'm always on here trying to explain things to people that I need this explained to me. Like, how do people do it? How do they do it? How does anything about our society make sense at this point? The propaganda that people repeat, depending on what side of the aisle they're on, it's so easy to trace it back to their source. You ask cui bono, and the answer is, you don't even have to ask. You can see who's pulling the strings on every single narrative. So why do people continue to pretend like they don't see it? Aliens and family and music and other things are my life. Well, that's good. That's good. In fact, speaking of aliens and music, tomorrow I'm going to eat another large dose of psilocybin mushrooms and jump on here and play. I have new music, so there's going to be a couple of new songs. And then we're going for our third attempt to go and interview local yachak, which is the Quechua word for shaman. Probably at least 5 grams, but they're wild, so that's not the same as eating. Also, we've had them for a while, so the potency may be degrading a little bit. I'm actually surprised that they still work, because I think it was about a year ago when we picked them. But they're still definitely kicking. What was I saying? Oh yeah, the yachak. We are going to go and visit her. They own Laguna Yani. There's videos of Laguna Yani on the channel you guys can check out if you haven't seen it. It's one of the coolest places on earth. I've been to a lot of places, and it's one of my favorite places ever. There's a series of waterfalls, and most of the people that come to visit don't realize that you can cross the river and then hike up. There's a trail. And then you get up about as far as you can go, and there's a really large waterfall and a huge pool. And then the water cascades down these rocks, and it creates like a hot tub, sort of what do they call it? The jacuzzi, they call it, that hole, because it's bubbling everywhere. And the water's crystal clear. When it's 6 feet deep, it looks like it's only a foot deep, because the bottom's right there. You can see it so well. Blue morphos everywhere, and they had a squirrel monkey, a baby that was hanging around there a little while. I don't know if it's still there, but super cool place. And the matriarch comes from a lineage of shamans, yachak, as I said in the Quechua terminology for it. So we have gone to attempt to interview her twice, and she wasn't home either time. So we have made another appointment, and it sounds like she's actually going to be there tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that video. I'm going to try to get her to spill as much of her secrets as I can. And also our retreat, which we are doing in September. That's next month, right? Yeah, September, November, and maybe December if there's still interest. So shoot me an email if you're interested in that. And, we're not just working with ayahuasca here. We're not just working with San Pedro. We're working with everything, all the tools that we have at our disposal, which is not a traditional approach, although we do integrate local shamans. And I definitely have spent years here learning all the traditional stuff. But I think that what any real, shaman in their traditional setting would do is acquire every tool that they can and master it. That's the whole point. So even though psilocybin hasn't traditionally been part of that repertoire, it is now. And so we're using ajo de monte, which is a plant that's generally used just to clean the entire being, energetically, spiritually, psychologically, emotionally. It's a vine and it smells like garlic, the leaves, when you rip them under your nose. There are different names for it. Ajo de monte is what they call it here, but I think it's, I don't know, there's another name in Peru. It's escaping me at the moment. Ajo de monte, that's what we call it. It's wild garlic, basically, is the translation. Uña de gato, of course, bobensana, various rapes. Sangre de drago is an excellent medicine. I think people are probably aware of it in the United States. Dr. Sandi is another tree resin that we work with a lot, that I'm actually going to try to start making some cheese and whatnot out of it. How's my health, Devin? I think basically I have chronic inflammation that is always going to be there. I've been dealing with this for 20 years, and plant medicine definitely helps. And who knows, maybe I'll be able to get it permanently under control. But what I've figured out over the years is that if I avoid certain behaviors, and basically, no alcohol, very little sugar, and some other, things like not a lot of wheat, it's manageable enough that I'm no longer ever really incapacitated, which is helpful because, I lost about a year recently, for those of you that might not know, just to like overwhelming chronic inflammation, I think. Peyote is our friend. Peyote is definitely our friend. Mescaline is, well, I shouldn't say mescaline because it's contextual. Peyote is not the same thing as San Pedro. And even the individual cactuses have a different entourage effect, a different profile. In the language of the shaman, you would say a different spirit. And the really interesting thing that I have experienced with San Pedro is the consistency from person to person. It's very similar to this idea about DMT archetypes, or the DMT entities that people perceive in the same way. And the most interesting thing about that is that it's not just that people are perceiving this entity as having the same aesthetic. The mantids, for example, tend to have the same message. The metallic bees always have the same message. Mantises even have very specific habits of like taking off the top of people's heads and operating directly on their brains, or operating in other ways. Once I have a back injury. I stepped out of the shower like 20 years ago and slipped and hit my back on the ground. And I knew that it was not good at the time, but it's really never stopped hurting. And one day, I smoked a relatively small amount of DMT in my friend's living room. I don't know why I didn't take a full dose. I normally wouldn't do that because my opinion on that is that it's better actually to go all the way or not go at all. The middle stage of DMT is pretty much just uncomfortable and scary, and it's not, I don't know why I did that. But at any rate, this screen suddenly formed behind me. How I could see that, I don't really know. I guess I was kind of out of body or something, and the screen formed behind my back, and then like a frame, and then in the center of it where the glass was, it was like a touch screen, and there was just all this information moving around at first, and then these lasers came out of the top and the bottom, 4 of them, and they shot directly into the injury in my spine, and it hurt incredibly bad. I mean, it felt like, as if it was being severed by like a knife, a dull knife, maybe even. It was crazy how much it hurt, only for a second. And then I heard this voice say, "Oh no, you didn't take a big enough hit, so we couldn't establish a strong enough connection to repair the injury." To this day, I've wondered, if I had smoked more, if it actually would have been able to repair those nerves, which may not be as crazy as it sounds. The enhanced neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, I don't know if that actually applies to the kind of nervous system wiring that we have in our spinal cord, but I wouldn't really be surprised if you could experience some kind of improvement on some sort of nerve damage. like that with psychedelics. But what I was actually saying is that San Pedro has that type of consistency in the specificities of the visions that are experienced. I've mentioned this vision many times on the channel, but the experience of becoming a photon and being in the sea of photons that are also somehow monads, which is an individual unit of consciousness that can't be broken down any further, basically. It is that part of the consciousness that is reincarnated. It's actually got an equivalent in the material world. Not that photons aren't material, but you know what I mean. There's always these antinomies, right? Everything has a contradiction that balances it. And a carbon molecule would potentially, like, let's say it starts out in the heart of a star and it ends up on Earth, and it begins its series of incarnations as a bit of dirt. And it is worn down and the molecule escapes, but it ends up in some rock in a hole. And that hole is a coal mine, or not a mine, but, a deposit of coal. And the pressure eventually causes that little bit of carbon to become a diamond. And then over time, the sun heats up and swells to the extent that that original bit of carbon is released, and as would be the case if it was subjected to the heat of the sun, and it would be essentially that same bit of carbon that was released from the star in the first place. It would be totally unchanged despite having incarnated as a bit of dirt and some coal and eventually a diamond. So that's kind of the idea of Leibniz's monads, that there's this correspondence in the physical world to the photon, which is, according to San Pedro, the individual unit of consciousness. And since that vision, I've been on quite a ride trying to understand what exactly it was that I was shown and to look for physical evidence of it. And I've been actually quite shocked at what I've turned up. And of course, having been a student of the mysteries, since I was 12 years old or something, the LVX, the Lux Eterna, it's this divine light that is consciousness, basically. And, I've had an awareness of that, and I've known the importance of light in these mystical traditions. But it wasn't until recently that I happened to be reading about photons for whatever reason, and I read that, I actually looked it up deliberately because I thought, wait a minute, if consciousness is, somehow emanating from photons, or it has its basis in photons, it's coming from the light somehow, basically. What is the lifespan of a photon? And it turns out that it's at least 1 billion years, but probably infinite. And so then, of course, it clicked, the rest of the way, that we have all these religious traditions that talk about this eternal, infinite, unchanging place of white light, or, Jesus says, I am the light of the world, which is obviously the adept that was really faking the story, just blatantly saying, I am an allegory of the sun, pretty blatant reference there. But I am the light. There's all sorts of, all over the planet. I mean, you guys know, I don't need to tell you this. But so this connection between this infinite consciousness and light is well established pretty much universally. And then to realize that the photon is literally the only thing in the universe that is possibly infinite. That was a major connection for me to make. It really put a tremendous amount of stuff possibly into perspective. Mother says thank you for that, but I'm not sure what that is. So there was something else, though, about the photon and its potential infinite nature. Oh, and that's another thing about it. We have this idea of this realm of infinite light that is somehow, nothingness, but also consciousness. And the photon has no mass, even though it apparently has momentum, which is oddly reminiscent of this idea of this, light that's also nothingness, that's also somehow consciousness. But yeah, so that, and then also we have all of these different accounts of the deity as being unchanging, infinite, without desire, like above all that. And from the point of view of the photon, there is no time and there is no space. So from the point of view of the ultimate consciousness, assuming that this is accurate, there is no change. It is infinitely eternal, one moment, exactly as has been described by all of the mystics. And, myself, I experienced it once, that classic nirvana state. So it seems like mystery solved, when you take an outrageously high dose of San Pedro, or you meditate until you have deactivated the reducing valve in your nervous system and you're confronted with the absolute ultimate reality. You have only merged your mind with God, but it turns out it's just light. That's what's happening. You're actually seeing from the point of view of your constituent parts, your smallest constituent part, which is the photon. In that particular San Pedro vision, though, I'm still trying to wrap my head around how it could be that each individual awareness somehow corresponds to one of those individual photons. That was the basic message of this vision that was being narrated by this cactus spirit. And, since then I've talked to shamans who, I had never spoken before. We didn't have any pretext. There was no context, nothing. And the guy just started talking about how it's a dialogue with the light, and it's really just the light, isn't it? And, I've seen other people take really high doses and start babbling about the millions and trillions and billions of points of light. So, anyways, that was a very long-winded roundabout response to this comment that peyote is our friend, because that is one of the most interesting experiences, I guess, that I've ever had. And another sad reality, it's kind of necessary, but the truth is that most people that drink San Pedro in a ceremonial setting are getting tourist medicine, like almost 100% of the time, because there's a very, very high possibility of blackout at higher doses. And so most San Pedro shaman give you tourist medicine, because they don't want to deal with the, rolling around in a puddle of vomit with some crazy gringo for 16 hours. Because the medicine, San Pedro lasts for so long. If someone checks out, it can be a while before they return. And it's happened to me before. In both cases where I had someone that really had difficulty during a ceremony, they were the biggest people that I have ever in my life had in a ceremony. It's just that Murphy's Law thing. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong. In the one case, it was like a 6'4" professional bodybuilder who was like 22 years old, so 24 years old, full of energy, way stronger than me, way bigger than me. Completely stark raving naked, completely out of his mind. And it came down to actually having to physically restrain him, which I was only capable of to an extent. And, I had to basically control his movements until he was, back to not baseline, but back under control. And it took about 8 hours. And I had to be absolutely focused, because if he made a sudden movement, hit me with his elbow, knocked me out or something, we'd have a big problem. So, I can understand the tourist medicine approach, having experienced that, but I also don't feel that it's fair. especially if people have come, thousands of miles and paid a lot of hard-earned money to have this experience, and then you give them this watered down medicine. It can still be of tremendous benefit. There can still be a lot of insights. It still can be good medicine for people. But I personally would rather take the risk and have to deal with meltdowns. It doesn't usually happen, and then once with ayahuasca too, the only person I've had that really, really, I couldn't just bring them back with an Icaro or, a little bit of sople with tobacco or something. He was the same size and age as the other. Well, no, he was 27, I guess, but much younger, huge bodybuilder, same exact scenario, only this time it was ayahuasca. So it was much more brief. It was only maybe an hour, before I was able to bring him back to focus. But yeah, that's the sad thing about that particular medicine, because most people will not experience it at that level unless it's an accident. And of course, it doesn't matter who the facilitator is. It's a little bit risky to take really, really high doses of San Pedro. Even after you have a lot of experience, that's one of the most important things to remember about psychedelics. A lot of people base their future on experiences of the past, which is called heuristic bias. And if you do that with psychedelics, you can be sorely disappointed, because it doesn't really matter what your skill level is. It helps, and if you have worked through a lot of your shadow stuff and your traumas, and you have a high level of metacognition and, awareness, and you have developed your ability to concentrate with meditation and breath work and all of this stuff, and you know how to use tobacco to keep your mind focused, even with all of that stuff, things can still get away from you. It definitely can still happen. So don't ever get too comfortable, especially when drinking alone. I really have only had 3 in my entire life, where I was like really, really overwhelmed to the point where it was problematic. The first time I ate an insane quantity of mushrooms when I was 21 years old and completely blacked out, woke up in jail. The experience that I had was completely crazy, but it had nothing to do with my body. Apparently I was walking around and talking to people and, went out and what got me arrested was just that I walked up to some cops and started spouting a bunch of really crazy poetry, that I did recognize when the judge read it. But yeah, that was the first time that I learned the hard way, that despite my experience, you can still get overwhelmed. And then once a friend brought LSD, I'd been sick for about a year. I didn't have the presence of mind that I needed, and he misdosed. The acid was twice as strong as he thought. He said it was 100 micrograms, and after he left, I found a tab that actually had 200 UGs printed on it from the bottom corner of the sheet, so it was actually labeled, and he still got it wrong, and so he ended up taking twice what he thought, and I didn't do anything too crazy, but I did get stuck in a loop, which I was really surprised later, that could happen to me, because I just thought, I've done this thousands of times in my life, probably literally 1,500 times or something, specifically LSD. Over the years, would never have imagined that I was still capable of getting stuck in a loop. But again, I wasn't in the best shape, and unfortunately somebody wasn't paying attention, and about 6 hours of just stuck in this loop over and over and over again, the same pattern of words coming out of my mouth over and over and over and I was aware of it, but there's nothing I could do about it. I didn't like that very much. And then one other time, I guess I drank a huge dose of San Pedro, and that's when I turned into light. So again, it wasn't really problematic, but I definitely, when I came out of the vision, I was in an abandoned house on my friend's property. I mean, I hadn't wandered away, but I didn't know how I got there, and that's not really good, So yeah, no matter how much experience you have, definitely always have to be aware that there are things in the universe that are far more powerful than any of us. What's going on, Evan? Um, yeah. Yeah. Don't set yourself up to learn that lesson the hard way. Um, really, that's, one of the most powerful lessons of life in general. Most of the times that I have ended up in some kind of trouble over the course of my life. It just comes down to getting cocky, and the universe is like smacking you down, like you're coming up too fast. You get smacked down because you don't have enough class, and so humility is definitely the great mediator of tragedy and calamity and catastrophes. Maybe that's the problem in the United States. People have had it too easy, and they've had too much money, and they've had the wrong role models for far too long. And so now there's something like a collective Saturn return that has come home to roost in the minds, bodies, and souls of our brethren in the United States. I guess probably most of you guys are in the United States. But yeah, I think that's probably going to do it for me for tonight. I need to practice for tomorrow, tomorrow's mushroom jam session. And I honestly didn't have much of a plan for tonight. I published a video, and I always do a live stream anytime that I publish a video. So if you guys haven't seen it, go check it out. If you're interested in any of the plants, there's a blog in the description that has affiliate links to everything except for the really dangerous plants. Obviously, Toei, no one is going to sell to you on the internet, I hope. There's no reason for most people to have that. Definitely don't go to Peru and sign up for any year-long Toei dietas. I don't know who thought that would be okay, especially for just whoever can pay for it. If there is ever a person that needs to do a year-long Toei dieta, it's going to be some shaman, some indigenous person, almost certainly, that has really earned their stripes. But to allow just anyone that can pay for it to do something like that is definitely criminal. That's pretty much, like, no question about it, criminal. So don't do that. Not even, there are also 6-month Toei dietas. Don't do that either. I can't imagine why anyone could possibly, who could that help? It's just a money grab, you guys. Sorry. It is, a lot of these dieta programs are. It's, unfortunate that the world that we live in is so dominated by profit motive. I'm all about, nice full bank account. That's great. But this mentality that seems to have infected most of the planet at this point, I'm at a loss to understand what the necessity for it is. It's a bit much. Seems to me that if we could all be happy with having just a little bit more than enough, everyone would have a little bit more than enough. I'm pretty much certain that that's how the math works out. It's, one of the great travesties of especially the United States is that the propaganda has been so good and so long-standing. The influence has had such a duration that there are poor people that will viciously defend the rights of their exploiters to exploit them. It never ceases to amaze me that they have actually successfully conditioned otherwise intelligent people to accept that. to the extent that they actually will defend it as if it's a holy obligation. But I'm sure that all of the people that watch my streams don't need to hear any of that, because we all already know that we have to do better. And I'm sure all of us already are doing better. And you can do even better than your already good doings by becoming a patron. My recent criticism of Russell Brand definitely cost me a few bucks. And we're a demonetized channel, and we don't get any support from YouTube. And I'm constantly pissing people off and compelling them to delete their patronage. So if you appreciate the channel, we appreciate your support, and I'll see you guys again tomorrow.